Hi, hello, welcome or welcome back. If you don't know me, I'm Anna, a clinical psychology doctoral candidate. This channel is all about real-life applications to psychology, so if that is something you're interested in, please consider hitting like, subscribing, hitting the bell notification button, all that good stuff. Today we're talking about some questions to ask yourself when you notice somebody's shadow self coming out. But before we get into that, I do have a fundraiser today. I completely dropped the ball with a fundraiser last November. And so this month I'm hosting a very vital and larger fundraiser with the goal of $1,000. Usually we set the goal around $700 and we've been doing really well this year. So I really thank everyone who has donated thus far. But because I didn't include a fundraiser last month, this one will be a little bit of a larger one. One of my resolutions for 2021 was to reach a specific number in terms of fundraisers, and I don't quite remember what it was. I have to go check. But either way, if you want to help me get my New Year's resolution this year, this would be a great way to help me, and I really would appreciate it. So today's fundraiser is for Planned Parenthood. The Supreme Court has made it pretty clear that they intend to overturn Roe versus Wade, which is a huge step backwards for American women. And it's not actually going to stop women from exercising their reproductive rights. It's just going to make it harder and more dangerous, specifically for women who have less means, because women who are of high socioeconomic status will always be able to travel to some place where they can get done what needs to be done. Poland also did the same thing not too long ago, a few years ago, I think, and already Polish women are starting to perish because of that. Pro-life, am I right? Now, we personally are not able to change what is happening with this except to vote for better people, which I highly encourage everyone to do. But what we can do is to at least provide to the Planned Parenthoods that will remain open in the blue states, so that women who are pouring in from red states very desperately will be able to have some resources. I always encourage people to donate just a little bit more than they feel comfortable doing, because part of abundance is not just receiving from the universe, but also giving back. And if you want to receive a little bit more than you need, then it also makes sense to give a little bit more than you want to give. Thank you so much if you decide to donate. It would mean so much to me, and I will also be donating as always. And let's just get into the video. So a little bit of a reminder, if you're not familiar with the shadow self, you haven't watched my last video on this topic, what is the shadow self? Carl Jung was a follower of Freud. He was pretty big in old school psychoanalysis, and he came up with this concept, the shadow self, which is when in childhood, the traits that were punished or discouraged from being expressed, we kind of internalized into this concept, the shadow self of ourselves. This part of us that lives in the shadows. And like anything suppressed, it can't stay hidden forever. Now, I don't want any misconceptions about the shadow self. Shadow, meaning like dark, does not equal bad or evil. The shadow self is not necessarily a conglomeration of negative traits. It can be negative traits, but probably not an entirety, because there are a lot of different reasons why something would get pushed to our shadow side, and they don't necessarily have to be because those traits would be harmful for other people. Some people make fun of Jung because he's too mystical and because you can't confirm or disconfirm the existence of some of his concepts. Personally, I have that issue with Freud far more than I have with Jung. But honestly, you can call it a shadow self or you can call it something else. It doesn't really matter. There's nothing mystical or pseudoscientific about the fact that there is a side of us that we pushed to the shadows. That is not really something up for debate. Call it whatever you want. So when are some moments to watch out for someone's shadow self possibly popping up? I've noticed the shadow self tends to come up a lot when people are highly intoxicated, because that's when your defenses are down, and that's when part of who you really want to be starts to bleed into your behavior. For example, I've been rewatching Breaking Bad recently, and there is this scene where Walter White gets really drunk and he gets his son drunk, starts a fight with his brother-in-law, is just really belligerent and messy. And when I was looking at that scene, I was thinking, oh, this is his shadow self. And I think that's completely true, because Walter White, as we'll discuss in a later video, is honestly a narcissist. And of course his shadow self would be a narcissist. That is who he truly is. It's been pushed to the shadow up until now, and now finally it's coming undone under stress. I know somebody else who is the most laid back, chill person I know, and a handful of times when this person has been highly intoxicated, I've seen a very loud, almost messy side of them come out. It's really interesting, and I realized that is their shadow self. Like I mentioned, the shadow self also comes out during stress, because it takes energy to suppress part of us that we don't want to express, and stress takes away some of that energy. It really leaves us a little bit vulnerable. Again, Walter White, he was dealing with cancer and the meth industry, so of course he was stressed out when he flipped a And also I've noticed that stress in particular, when we feel criticized or shameful or defensive about something, that is a huge piece when our shadow self comes out as well. And also I think the shadow self tends to come out in puberty, in part because usually in puberty it hasn't quite been pushed to the shadow, it's what's to become the shadow self that's being expressed, because it is a very stressful time, a lot of bullying, a lot of in-group versus out-group dynamics. At the neurological level, synaptic pruning is happening, which is always very stressful for adolescents. People are having difficulty suppressing who they truly are, or maybe they want to rebel against the people who are encouraging them to suppress certain sides of them. And many people do self-regulate after puberty, and they start to suppress that, to push that to the shadow self. But when they're in puberty, they're also more impulsive and they kind of let their shadow self take reign. So pay attention when someone's shadow self emerges. And when you notice that, here are some questions to ask yourself. What is this person's shadow self? Pay attention to the traits that people exhibit when you find yourself noticing that their shadow self has been activated. If their shadow self were its own person, if you were to make a description of it or a drawing and associate that with who this person is, how would you describe them? For example, if you are talking about somebody who's very sweet and people-pleasing and demure, I would venture a guess maybe their shadow self could be very blunt, cold, assertive, or actually more even aggressive. So really start to get a really clear picture of what is this person's shadow self. The next question you want to ask yourself is, where did this originate from? Why did this person banish these specific traits? What was going on in their childhood or sometimes even adulthood that they decided it would be unacceptable to the people in my life to demonstrate this particular trait? For example, maybe they had a lot of narcissistic family members around them, and growing up they saw that and they vowed, I will never be like that. And so 99% of the time, they are the opposite of narcissistic, actually let people walk all over them, all that stuff. But then when that 1% shows up and their shadow self emerges, as in maybe when someone hurts them or something of the sort, some sort of stress, maybe that is when their narcissistic shadow self comes out and says, oh, fuck that, no, you're not hurting me, and gets really vengeful. So in this hypothetical case, their shadow self formed because they made the conscious or unconscious decision to never be like the people around them. Another example is, let's say that the most hardworking person you know falls into a deep depression for not too long, just a day, let's say, just for a day, because it's not like clinical depression, it's just a glimpse of their shadow self. And in this day, they can't get out of bed, they can't do anything, they're unmotivated, they're completely dysthymic. If that is their shadow self emerging, their shadow self could be this hopeless, dejected, unmotivated person. They pushed away the side to themselves because they knew deep down, if I let this person take reins even a little bit, I'm never going to get out of bed. I am going to be clinically depressed. I'm not going to be able to do all the things I want to do. They know that if they ever stop the cycle of go, 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 it would be really hard for them to get back up. And so they push that to the shadow self and they just go, go, go all the time. There are obviously endless possibilities of how and why someone's shadow self can form. But in asking the right questions, we can come to a clearer understanding of why this person is the way that they are. For example, this isn't completely related to a shadow self per se, but it is about asking the right questions. I was speaking to someone who, for the zillionth time, was telling me, you have to respect your parents no matter what happens, no matter what they do, no matter how hard they abuse you. Parents have to be respected. Water is not thicker than blood. And after hearing this for the millionth time, I turned to this person and I realized that this belief didn't just come out of thin air. This was something that was told to them, that they completely internalized without ever questioning because they needed to believe it. And so I got a little curious and I started asking this person about their parents, what they were like as people, how they were describing them, especially how the first few words that they described them were. The first thing they said about their parents is they were often gone growing up. They were absent. And after some intellectualizing on their part and explanations about, why they were a certain way as opposed to how they actually were, and after some more probing from me, they finally gave a little bit of trait, which they said they were cold and stern. And I realized that they were reciting this, you have to respect them, you have to respect your elders, because they were not necessarily trying to convince anyone else. They were trying to convince themselves. They were disappointed in their parents, but it would have been too painful for them to admit this. And so instead, they just regurgitated the justifications that had been fed to them. So pay very close attention to the way people talk about things, not only what they say, but also what they omit, and ask the right questions to help you get to the origins of why they are the way they are. Another question to ask yourself is, when does the shadow self come out of the shadows? For this specific person, in what circumstances does that happen? Is it when they're feeling a specific emotion in a specific place with a specific person, in a specific state of mind, in a particular time in a cycle, such as, a lot of people, their shadow self might come out in the winter because there are certain even neurological and emotional things that happen in the winter. If you can know when to expect to see someone's shadow self, you'll be better prepared and you'll be better equipped to pay attention and ask the right questions when it does happen. Now, if you want to help this person, a question to ask yourself is, how would it look if this person healthily integrated their shadow self into the rest of who they are? And maybe what are you able to help them with to accomplish that? Now, this is a very important task, very complex. I don't expect non-psychologists or non-therapists to be able to do that. And so I'm not necessarily encouraging you to do that, but if you want to help them in some way or other, that is a question to ask yourself. How could you help them integrate their shadow self? Because the shadow self is not supposed to just be pushed to the side. That's how it gets stronger. That's how it shows up in unhealthy ways. How you're supposed to deal with it is by healthily integrating it. So let's say someone who's normally very passive and their shadow self is very cruel. Integration might look for them like speaking up sooner when they're mad, not letting things bubble up until they explode, but rather saying from the first moment they're upset, "I'm really mad at you," or "I don't think that was an okay thing of you to say here. That made me really sad." So for you, maybe a way that you can help them help themselves is by letting them know that you are a safe person for them to do that with. They can start to tell you when they're starting to feel upset. Not necessarily when it gets to a very intense emotion, but just when they're starting to feel glimpses of being upset over something. Another example, let's say, that person whose shadow self is very depressed and unmotivated and they've become completely unproductive every now and then when their shadow self shows up. Integration might look for them like taking breaks, resting, taking some time every day to not do anything. For you, maybe this means every now and then when you see they're getting stressed up, they're getting really tightly wound, saying, "Hey, let's take a 15-minute break, let's go for a walk, let's have a snack, can I talk to you about something?" So that they see that if they start to integrate a little bit of that shadow self, they don't necessarily have to fall into a pit of desperation. It doesn't necessarily have to completely overtake their life. And if you want to help yourself, the question to ask yourself is this person's shadow self a danger to you? To answer this question, you kind of have to answer some other questions first. How integrated is their shadow self as of now? How likely is it that their shadow self will completely take over? How harmful would it be for you if their shadow self did take over? So if their shadow self were a person, if it completely overtook this person that you're dealing with, would that be a person that hurts you? Because here's the thing, a person's shadow self is not necessarily bad for you, and a person's shadow self is not necessarily going to completely take over. Hypothetically, someone could have a completely aggressive and cruel shadow self, but it might not be an issue for you. Their shadow self is their shadow self precisely because they have vowed to live their life in a different way, in a different direction. It's a yin and yang. If you choose one thing, the polar opposite is lying somewhere underneath the surface, somewhere in the shadow. So in a way, it's a good thing if their shadow self is not great, because that is who they vowed to not be. Maybe their shadow self never unleashes itself on you, or maybe they're able to integrate it by, letting out aggression with, say, boxing classes so that they don't hurt the people that they care about. A person's shadow self doesn't necessarily need to be an issue for you. The only circumstances, in my opinion, in which someone's shadow self should be of concern to you are if, first of all, if their shadow self is someone that you would not want to be around, someone that would cause you harm, and if that shadow self is also not healthily integrated. If it's either running rampant or glimpses of it are popping up uncontrollably. And if that's the case, then yeah, maybe you have a difficult decision to make. Those are some questions to ask yourself when someone's shadow self pops up. I hope this was helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in a few days.